Hello, hope all is well. So this is part 3 of the new firmware update to the Deliverance model in the FM3 and also the other Fractal units. And I'll be comparing it in this short video to my OG VHT Deliverance from 2005. It's, I guess you'd call the OG a Mark I model. Obviously, this new model in the Fractal unit is a Mark II, so there will be some differences there. And I've been over the differences in the other videos compared to Mark I in the Fractal units, but I thought it'd be interesting to do a new comparison to the actual amp that I have. So a quick bit of housekeeping. So we have the Ditto looper on the floor. We'll be using that same riff that we've heard over and over again. My apologies, but it has a good mix of, like, there's some palm mute in there and a bit of lead. I think gives a good impression of what the amp, or at least the model against the amp, might sound like. And so we're running the looper into a splitter, and that splitter is running to the FM3 on one side, and on the other side it's running into my VHT Deliverance tube amp. The tube amp is then going into a SIR reactive load, and then that reactive load is going straight into my interface. And I'll also add, we're using an IR loader within the door, so there's no IR loader on the FM3 patch. As you can see, it's literally just in and out in the amp block. And for the IR we're using today, it's the Otto cabs don't sell, and it's 57 mic on sort of V30 diesel cab using Cabinetron IR loader. And for the FM3 setup, the important thing is in the speaker tab, I've set it to a greenback impedance curve, because apparently the SIR is also based around a greenback impedance curve. And we've zeroed out speaker drive, speaker compression, compliance, and also speaker thump. So that's the speaker tab setting. And in terms of the actual amp settings, in this first test, what we'll be doing is I'll just play 2 amp settings, and then I'll use exactly the same FM3 settings or fractal settings that mimic the amp, and then we'll take it from there. So listening back, some of the same characteristics as we had when we're comparing the old firmware model to the new firmware model, in that in the voicing there's some other stuff going on. I'm not getting that kind of like hollow mid sort of feel. It's bassier, I guess, on the FM3 or the new firmware model, and the gain is somewhat different. So what I did on this next part is that using the VHT and the FM3 when they're running parallel, I dialed in a preset on the FM3 that more closely matched the sound of the actual real tube amp. And that's what I did in this preset here. So in terms of the actual amp settings to mimic the sound coming out of the tube amp, we had to change the EQ first off. So I'm adding a lot more kind of treble and presence, and I'm also adding a bit of input trim, which adds a bit more gain in the front end, and then lowering the bass a tiny bit and lowering the mids a tiny bit. And one of the other tweaks I did was also in the preamp page, which is taking the RCA preamp tube type. I'm not sure what preamp tube is in there at the moment, but this seemed to work quite well. And I changed the low cut and the high cut frequency here to 40 and 10K. I think that was what the old firmware or the Mark I model was at. And the other big change was on the output EQ. So with this EQ, I changed it to input, and we're dialing out some of those low mids and some of those mids, so like 250 and 500. And I felt that by doing that, we got a lot closer to the actual sound of the tube amp. So let's have a listen. So yeah, by doing that, I think got a lot closer to the actual sound of the tube amp, and it seemed to respond in a similar way. Although it's not, by doing this, I don't think it's quite the same as in the voicing of the amp, because obviously here we're just messing with the EQ of the signal going in to get closer to what's coming out of the tube amp. But it's quite effective, and on this last test, what I did was that I sliced up both of those recordings and split them at different points, and I added an EQ, which most people, I guess, would use when either recording, playing live, or even mixing, with just a simple low cut and a high cut. So a low cut of 80 Hertz and a high cut of 10K. So by doing that with the just the EQ in there with the low cut and the high cut, they are, I think, pretty damn close. There's still some extra, I guess, juice or saturation going on with the actual tube amp, which I guess if I spent a bit more time dialing in, say, the gain settings or the input trim, could maybe get even closer to that. But in an actual mix, I think with these two sounds, you'd be hard pressed to really tell a difference. So hopefully that gave you a good idea of how the Fractal, or the new D60 within the Fractal unit, stacks up with an older VHT Deliverance, you can really tweak things and dial things in to get really close, and these extra settings within the amp page really make a difference. The big one here, of course, is on the output EQ when it's set to input, and then you're dialing in the EQ of how the guitar signal is going into the amp, and to get a similar kind of more hollowed out mids kind of vibe, or at least lowering these sort of mids that give that, I guess, more pronounced high mid kind of feel to the amp. And then outside of that, it's just in the preamp tab, changing the low cut frequency and the high cut frequency, and this preamp tube. And that's pretty much it. You know, after that, it's just dialing in the EQ to be brighter, I guess, with the treble and presence, and lowering a bit of the bass, and then figuring out the gain. I mean, every amp is slightly different, all tubes are slightly different, so you'll get different responses. And at the end of the day, I think it's less so of, you know, well, try and get it to sound as close as possible to a tube amp, when it's really about dialing in as good a sound as you can get, regardless of if you're using digital modeling, profiling, or effects or whatever, or an actual tube amp or solid state amp, who knows. But it's about trying to get the best sound possible for you and the best kind of tone and response. So hopefully that was useful. Thanks again for sticking it out and hearing those same kind of riffs and these comparisons, and I hope to see you in the next one. Take care.